Okay, so the recording has started. So whenever y'all are ready, we can start.
Good afternoon, folks, students, and scholars. We're gonna be presenting the Dreamers narrative and also the Model Minority Myth workshop that is gonna be presented by my partner, Diego.
Thank you, Carlos.
We're gonna be presenting the outline. Um, the first one is gonna be the community guidelines. So I'm gonna need you guys to help me with that. And the second one is understanding the dreamer's narrative by me, and the disconstructing the model of minority by Diego. Okay, so I'm gonna need you guys to help me, and you guys could put it on the chat, sharing some guidelines you would like to be respected during our discussion today in the chat. You guys are free to type in. Um, yeah, thank you, Ria, for taking space and making a space and safe for everybody. Diego said to be respectful, of course. Any other ones? To be open to a new experiences, of course. Yes. Also, open space, and this space is only safe for us, and of course it's going to be recorded, so we will move on. So the icebreaker activity, we're gonna play a little game. A little game.
Thank you, Carlos, for the introduction. So my name is Diego, and I'll be facilitating this icebreaker activity. It's hopefully it works out everything. So I'm gonna ask everybody to to take out your phone and or if it's easier, type it on your computer, and we're gonna go to menti.com. If you have your phone, it's easier. You could just open with your phone and scan the QR code, and it's gonna take you to the questions that we have prepared for this icebreaker. Please, hopefully some of you are there already. Now lovely Sharon has facilitated the Mentimeter, so I'll go ahead and get started. So the first question that we're asking is, what is one word that describe you, and how are you doing today? I'm gonna go ahead and give you all a few seconds to go ahead and put them down. Let's see. Let's see some. Oh, yeah, you also feel free to put them in the chat. So if that's easy. One, describe me strong. Oh, Frida was sharing that she's feeling strong and she's doing well. I'm not sure if you're able to put it, Sharon.
Yeah, I don't think the results are gonna pop up, unfortunately. So if y'all just want to share in the chat and look at the pretty screen. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's still a lovely screen background, but we encourage you all to put them in the chat. That also works as well. Feel free to unmute yourself if that's also helpful. You want to share maybe why you're feeling that way too. I see somebody from KRC mentioned energized and stressed. I do feel that. I also feel like that. If unmuting also works too, so feel free to. I encourage people to unmute themselves. Sharon, excited, sleepy. High five to that too. I'll put in, I think, how I'm doing today. I say a little bit tired. it's a little bit cloudy, so that's also why I'm feeling like that. But I see not much going on in the chat, so thank you for sharing. We're gonna move to the next question. So the next question is, if you could be an ice cream flavor, what flavor would you be? Oh, let me put it in the chat so it's also so you all have it too.
So I'm gonna
That's
share mine. Um, um, it's gonna be Rocky Road. I'm a bunch of mushrooms, marshmallows now.
all right.
I see green tea and mint chip. Good flavors.
Thank you, Carlos, for sharing. Yeah, I didn't know that that was a flavor, so I'm learning. Nor did I knew a green tea flavor or mint. I knew mint chip. It's pretty good. I do that. I think I would be vanilla just because of the weather. I'm not really feeling like doing much today. But thank you for sharing, Carlo, and those of you that are sharing on the chat. We're gonna give it like maybe a few more seconds if anyone is sharing as well. If not, we're gonna go ahead and continue. Oh, cheesecake. Yeah, cheesecake is always cheesy. Yes, cheese is always excellent. Thank you all for sharing. Oh, someone's laughing, laughing out loud. Thank you for that. And yeah, again, I'm not sure what happened with the QR technical difficulties, but I think we're gonna go ahead and move to the next portion of the presentation or the workshop. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Carlos Garcia. My pronouns is gonna be he, him, and his. I'm an undocumented student at this moment, attending East Los Angeles Community College, and I'm gonna tell you about my passionate. I'm passionate about trail work, and now also I'm in love with nature. So anything to do with flowers, animals, um, I love everything about it. Becoming a stronger community leader. I feel with this internship, I have learned many skills and I have learned how to relate with other students with the same struggles. And that's making me a better leader for my community. And also learning about undocumented issues that I did not know. And we're going to progress with the PowerPoint. And I hope you guys enjoy it. And I'm super excited to explain to you guys my topic.
Thank you, Carlos. As well, hi, my name is Derek Castro. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs, and I'm also undocumented. And I'm a senior at UC Irvine, and I'm double majoring in political science and Chicano Latino studies. Currently, I'm an intern at KRC Voices for Tomorrow. And thank you for being here and holding space for us and for you all. We're gonna move into the next portion. Thank you.
So the dreamer's narrative, something that I love researching about because I think a lot of people could relate with this topic. So what is the dreamer? The definition is refer to an immigrant youth who qualifies for development, relief, and educational for alien minors, and also often spell dreamers with the ER in the end. And personally, uh, I don't like this word because I'm not an alien and I'm not from a different world. So I dislike this word, but that's how we are called because we migrated from different countries. Next. What is the DREAM Act? The DREAM Act would permit certain immigrant students who have grown and and also raised in the US, and they could apply for a temporary legal status and to eventually obtain permanent legal status and become eligible for US citizenship. Qualification. younger than 31 on 15th of June of 2012 when the program started by Obama. Most have arrived to the US before turning 16 and lived the continuously since June 2007. I will be going further more details into the next slides, but this is what the Dream Act is about. Next, the Dream Act also also refers as DACA. Uh, res- Response to the failure of Dream Act legislations to pass both House and Congress, President Barack Obama intentionally the migration policy known as the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also called DACA, in 2012. DACA provides a 2-year deferment from deportation actions and provides eligibility for work permit. The requirements for obtaining DACA are have continually reside in the United States since June 15, 2007, up to the present time that you have been in this country. You have never, if you have never had a lawful immigration status on or before June 15 of 2012. Another one is going to be you might be enrolled into a college or any type of institution currently in school, have graduated or obtained a certificate of completion from high school or a GED certificate. Have no been convicted of a felony, of a crime, significant misdemeanors, or 3 or more other misdemeanors. So, in other words, if you have a criminal record, the lawyers and immigration will uh, pay really um, attention into your case, and many other um, applicants also have this struggle because nobody's perfect. So in the bottom, I don't know if you could see, I posted a number that you could call, and for people who have like hard of hearing, like deaf, or have any disability. For example, like if you can write, if you can speak really well, um, there's those numbers so you could call, and they will help you out into your process. Where did the dreamers come from? They come all over different countries, but the dreamer began as a term used by undocumented activists as a way to humanize themselves to politicians, while but now it has become mis-issue. The term has become highly political and used by politicians to show their support for undocumented community. Over time, the undocumented community has begun to denounce this title because of its diverse effects. Now it seems like everyone is using this term, from the New York Times to Fox News to like Hispanic network and newspapers. In other words, this term has um, just put a picture in the world for us to to have a dream, the reason why we came to this country. Next, the the dreamers narrative creates a good as bad immigration narrative. Criminalization of immigrants that do not fit the idea of a dreamer, not a student, not fluent in the language that is spoke in this country that is English. Has a criminal background. Profilization for immigration, detention centers, minority minors, criminals offensive become more de- detrimental to immigrants. Double the risk, potential deportation and interactions with police. Enables politicians to divide immigrants, communities, and encourage incarcerated deportation. Um, One fact that we need to take into consideration, that we need to understand that good versus bad immigration narrative thrives because we are ignore of all the ways in which capitalism and racism are meant to keep us to the odds with each other. Good versus bad is a way to divide us to ensure we continue to be a second class citizenship. Next. So this is a video of a girl that did a presentation, and we will be glad to hear her her story. Sharon, is can you press play because we can't hear it.
For money and cheap labor. And this isn't even acknowledging the exploitation that undocumented people face in the workforce every single day. Living in a society that capitalizes off their existence, yet dehumanizes them. So when we talk about detention, we must look at the people that are there, the people that are suffering. You can pick and choose any time in history where you want to analyze and argue that immigrants were brought in to allow white folks to enter into a new sector of the economy with higher paying jobs, with better wages. But these aren't the things that we talk about when we talk about immigrants. Let's talk about some of the common stories we do here. The restrictionist on immigration, one who generalizes immigrants as criminals. If this is your story, you might say things such as, they take our jobs, they are criminals. You might question, why did they not do it the right way? As if it were that easy. You might even say they do not pay taxes. Let's look at the other side of that story, the value of immigrants. If this is your story, you might say things such as, they take the jobs that nobody wants. They pay taxes. We rely on them to pick our food. And they benefit our economy. What I'm here to tell you is that both of these narratives are harmful, because they both look at us as disposable economic variables. Whether we are contributing or taking, we continue to be dehumanized. But let's take it one step further. You might support this narrative, the dreamer narrative. The children that were brought here by no fault of their own, which in turn criminalizes our parents. These model citizens in the making have been able to navigate and challenge systems that weren't created for them. So we see the dreamer as being fetishized. Not only are these ideas of us unrealistic and oppressive, they avoid the psychological trauma that we carry every single day. And most importantly, they avoid the existence of our families. As a DACA beneficiary, I acknowledge the privilege I was granted under this program, but I also saw how it divided my community. I do not like to identify as a dreamer because it comes with this idea that my only dream is to attain citizenship. So who is being left out of this conversation? Our parents. The majority of our community is being left out. Society may not view our parents as model.
Um, so she gives a good example how immigrants come to this country and work really hard to obtain money in order to send to the countries. Um, and still, we are the bad people. We are the aliens that come to this country and take other people's job. But in other words, um, we're not here to take anybody's job. We're here to progress in life and help each other out. Next. Um, the the alternative to the dreamers narrative, Century for All and Citizenship for All campaign. Protection for All does not focus on DACA reception, but on the general immigration community. Century for All and Citizenship for All campaigns are inclusive address to the entire undocumented community and works to provide century and protection to 11 undocumented immigrants in the U.S. With this being said, there's many more immigrants that is not is not is not is not visualized or is not they're not there's more immigrants in this country than other people might think there is, but we're a big number and the fight isn't over yet. Continue. So this is me when I was in middle school. Why do why do I'm not identify as a dreamer? And this is my personal story. I came to this country at the age of 12 from a beautiful country called Mexico. I was not the best student, but I tried really hard to learn the language. I faced a lot of racism growing up. For example, walking from school to home, I was called different names like Beaner, like hurry up, Beaner. Um, Also, I was I was discriminated by my accent because I couldn't speak the language really well. Um, why I'm not a dreamer? Because I don't have DACA. Um, I'm not a DACA recipient because when Obama started with the Dream Act, I s- I got informed and I contact a lawyer from Anaheim, and I started my process with him. And unfortunately, I was missing 1 year. So that year they qualified me from getting this DACA. But of course, I was sad. I did not know what was going on because I live in LA and he was over there. The only time we would communicate it was through emails. I did send out my information, and sadly, he did not process my documents to immigration. So I'm here still fighting for for my educational goals. Um, so pretty much sharing my personal story because of how strictly and difficult it might be to get DACA, and a lot of document students and a lot of document people could not get it based on any requirement. You know, like people could have a criminal record, but overall, like yes, they did bad in the past, but they could do better in the future. Next. um, community community resources for undocumented immigrants. United We Dream is our organization that advocates for fair treatment of immigrants, youths, and families, regardless of their immigration status. There are all over in 26 states, and I believe they have 56 um, main locations in all these states. The other one that I thought was really necessary to put is the um, undocumented than the newsseries.org. Pretty much, this is one of the tools because most of the families right here in California and other states do not have health insurance, and a lot of people are scared to go to the doctor, and they're scared to go get a checkout because of their personal personal background. For example, not having papers or not having um, health care, or regardless to any immigration status. And for the third one, and the reason why I choose the Dream Center, because when they started, and a lot of institutions, um, they started helping undocumented students in their process for citizenship or any other convenience. So don't be shy. They're out there to help. Look for them in campus. They will help you. Next.
Again, thank you, Carlos, for sharing your story and for being comfortable enough for sharing your status with us. I always see that as really powerful, especially in spaces like this for community members and for people to like feel empowered. So thank you, KRC, and everybody to hold space. So that's really powerful. And I always have to comment on that. But moving on with the presentation, I will be going over deconstructing the model minority myth. Let's go ahead to the next slide. But before I do, I wanted to take a few moments and acknowledge and do a few acknowledgements to the current Asian hate that is it's rampant throughout the United States, as well as I myself identify as a non-Asian person, nor I am speaking for the whole community, nor I wanna speak for them. Rather, I'm speaking through my own research and what I was able to discover through my interest in doing a presentation like this. I'm really interested in learning more. I myself know a lot of what I research, and thank you for the space and being present. Please move to the next section. So what is the model minority myth? Again, it has to do with history, or it's rooted in history in the sense that throughout the United States history with Asian Americans have long lived in the United States since the late to the mid 1800s, but it starts to the 1920s, prior to 1920s, when Asian Americans were seen as the scapegoats, the ones who were pretty much the root cause problems for all of the issues in the United States. And it wasn't until the 1980s when Asian Americans were coined were given the script of pretty much the model minority. This had to do a lot with the civil rights movements that was happening. And it was used by politicians and media to pretty much create a division between minorities and use like stereotypes of Asians, of they were doing well economically, and they were getting education success. When in real, those were like the coins, pretty much, or the terms most associated with the model minority. Go ahead. Thank you. In this next video, please play until 4 minutes, but before you do play it, I wanted to give a little description of it. So it's pretty much like, again, a brief history on how Asian Americans pretty much went from being the quote unquote bad persons to like now being the models. And we'll see how, for example, now it's it's used to create a binary between bad and the good minorities, and how, for example, now it's used now to kind of like use the stereotype of like, oh, if you work hard or if you strap your boots, you'll be able to overcome every obstacle, when in reality we know that's not the issue, and it's just ignoring the systemic racism that exists in the United States. Please go ahead, play, and please stop at 4 minutes. Thank you.
You probably know this stereotype. Asians are hardworking, super smart, and really good at math and science. And all those things seem good, right?
It's so reductive because, you know, it's really stripping away the fact that you as an individual are talented or smart and saying, oh, it's because of your race.
This idea of the intelligent, well-behaved Asian American is known as the model minority myth. But don't be fooled by the name. It's not a compliment. It's one of the most persistent Asian American stereotypes and comes with some really harmful consequences. To fully understand it, we have to look at its origins and how we went from this to this. Hey, I'm Anna, and this Sunday on AJ+, we're dissecting the model minority myth, showing its evolution and highlighting how harmful it is, not only for Asians, but for all communities of color. Belinda tried to fit the mold for years.
I would say the model minority myth affected my relationship with myself and kind of clouding my vision of who I was as a person.
And Belinda's not alone in experiencing this. To learn more about the model minority myth, we spoke to Frank Wu, a professor in Asian American Studies.
The model minority myth is dangerous because it's a racial stereotype. It's a story, a script that, even though a little part of it is true, once we accept this racial generalization, it goes all sorts of places that we can't control.
You know, this model minority concept didn't always exist. When Chinese immigrants first showed up in the US in the 1800s, white America saw them as heathens who stole their jobs and raped their women. This was known then as the Yellow Peril. The xenophobia and discrimination escalated, leading Congress to pass the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which completely banned Chinese immigration to the US. Sounds kind of familiar, huh?
The notion that if you're Asian, you can never become American. You can't be a full member of this society.
And it didn't end there. As Asian immigration grew throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, they continued to face discrimination. There were violent mobs during the 1930s against Filipinos in Northern California, and of course, there was the Japanese internment during World War II. This scapegoating of various Asian communities went on until about the 1960s. And then in 1966, the New York Times published a piece by Professor William Peterson titled "Success Story, Japanese American Style." This article is considered one of the most influential stories ever written on Asian Americans and effectively gave birth to the term model minority. It said, barely more than 20 years after the end of the wartime camps, this is a minority that has risen above even prejudice criticism. By any criterion of good citizenship, the Japanese Americans are better than any other group in our society, including native-born whites. At first, the term only applied to Japanese Americans. Then it quickly grew to include all East Asians. Then eventually, anyone who even looks slightly Asian.
What is said of Chinese is extended to Japanese, what's said of Japanese is transferred to Koreans, and so on and so on and so on. That's why the model minority myth has just expanded, because people really can't tell the difference. They can't be bothered to.
And the success was partially true, at least in the realm of education. By the mid-1900s, Asian Americans, on average, had higher levels of education than African Americans. But that wasn't the whole story. In 1965, the Immigration Act reversed years of restrictive immigration policies that virtually banned all immigration from Asia. But it allowed only those with certain backgrounds to enter the US, namely professionals like doctors and engineers. It was a brain drain. And right as the civil rights movement was gaining steam, the model minority stereotype started to gain traction.
From the very beginning, the model minority myth has been false flattery. It's not even really about people of Asian descent. It's a way to insult African Americans, Hispanics, and others.
But despite this stereotype,
Thank you so much. Yeah, just encapsulated in that whole video. It's a very brief history of kind of like how, I guess, tables have turned, but yeah, it's not for the positive. It's rather for the negative, and kind of it's something that affects all other minority groups. If you could go ahead, go to the next
You
slide.
probably know this stereotype.
Thank you. Yes, kind of like what we saw in the past previously. The term, or I guess you want to call it script, was used to create the division between the good and the bad minorities. Again, it was heavily influenced by the 1960s civil rights movement, and it was used to undermine racial discriminations and the disparities that exist in the United States. It served to as a propaganda to undermine other ethnic and minority groups, just kind of like what we saw, or even parallel to today, kind of like these stereotypes stay within the United States to like to not like continue to accept the discrimination that exists. And one more external, but in the realms of politicians, they used was to discredit communism. So that was something that was happening in politics, meaning that during that time, it was also the time of the Cold War. So for the United States to coin Asian Americans as model citizens was also an objective that they had. So that's kind of, that was interesting for me when I learned, but those were like factors to how this model minority script was created, and it was used in politics. If you please go to the next slide. And from after like famous or infamous papers and research came out on, I guess, Asian Americans, I guess, success, you could call it. We see how mainstream, especially like the magazine, there was a recognized magazine, they pick and label Asian communities as model minorities since beginning the 1980s. At first, the term was given to Japanese Americans, and then it engulfs to entire Asian communities. And again, this served to just compare which minorities were the ones deemed good and the rest were deemed as bad. Kind of like it parallels the dreamer narrative that Carla was mentioning before. So just to kind of do a little parallel for y'all. Yes, go ahead to the next slide. And again, just to see in contrast, like the myths versus the realities. Some of the myths, as we saw, were or we're seeing more in media, are that Asian Americans are highly intelligent, they're submissive. We see throughout media or even in TV shows, on movies, how that stereotype still portrayed, played, and played over again. That it's also a myth that through hard work, you're gonna be able to overcome any obstacle of racism. So again, that was to pretty much backlash the civil rights movements that were advocating for disparities that existed among the Black communities. And again, that also trickles down to other minorities too. So by calling them, they're the ones who are able to pull throughout regardless of everything, was just done by politicians to kind of like undermine what they were trying to do. Again, for myths, we see how they were used for model for other minorities. The realities, as we see, it's a script. It allowed for them to gaslight Asian Americans, and whenever they would speak out against injustices, for example, Asian Americans have been long since the 1920s been advocates and vocal about social issues that they face and other minorities face. So that's something that it's often ignored, since they're the ones who are doing the most well. Their issues are kind of ignored, and by extension, the issues that other minorities may face are also ignored. So that's kind of how it affects every minority in any group. It affects them more negative than positive. So again, being a model, it wasn't positive, as we see. again, and it created a mentality now, or that exists today, is that if you can't succeed, it's because you're not working hard enough, or not thriving, or you don't want it anymore. So those kind of are what's the remnants that stay with us. Let's go to the next one. Again, why it matters. Today, we still see that Asian Americans still face systemic racism and discrimination, but the status of model minority allows them for these instances to be ignored. We saw a couple of them through the video we saw earlier. There's also other examples. I'm not sure if you can see, like in the picture right there, we see hate crimes going on today. We see Asian Americans be left out on many of the resources. And the stereotypes are still harmful because the community doesn't get the resources that they need or support that they need. That's pretty much it. Go ahead to the next slide. Again, so what does this mean for the Asian undocumented community? In the following video, please play until 2 minutes. But before we do, I wanted to mention kind of like undocumented issues, immigration are usually taught in the spaces of being Latinx or being from like Latina backgrounds. Yet, as we will see, that's not the case. There is about 1.7 undocumented Asian Americans, and that's kind of like being ignored or left out of the picture. So hopefully we'll get a little.
I will build.
Go ahead, you can play. You can get a little brief synopsis of how they're big. Go ahead.
Great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall.
For all of the talk about building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border, the truth is that most immigrants are not coming from Mexico. Right now, Asian Americans are the fastest growing group of new immigrants in our country. And of the 11 million undocumented immigrants, 12% are Asian. We want to unpack that number, so we came here to Flushing, Queens, home to the largest Asian community in New York City, to meet two people who want to speak up about this. I'm Maria Hinojosa.
There are people out there who wants to vote, who wants to participate in American politics, but they just can't because of their status. 1 in 7 Asians living in New York City are undocumented, and I'm one of them, and came to this country when I was little. It definitely is not just a Latino issue.
Hello! How are you? I'm Maria.
Choi Young-sun.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Hello, Maria. Chongwei, nice to meet you.
In this community, you don't really talk about being undocumented publicly?
Yeah, it is something that's very stigmatized, I would say.
Ask your mom, why did she decide that she wanted to talk for
그래서
the first time?
그 카메라 이런 걸로 그 안에 인터뷰 이런 거 안 해봤잖아. 근데 이번에 하기로 결정을 했냐고.
필요하니까.
Because it's necessary.
And why does she feel it's necessary?
우리의 권리를 찾기 위해서. 우리가 여기를 오기 전에는 장애 아이들을 가르치면서 그 장애자보다도 더 장애자, 마음의 장애자가 된 거예요. 여기 와서. 그래서 미국에서는 가르쳐줄 줄 알았던데 그거를 더 배울 수 없게 만들어야 된다는 거야. 법.
Thank you for that. And just to recap our summary of the video too. Again, we see again and again Asian American, undocumented Asian American issues being ignored and kind of like being stigmatized and not really talked about. Yet, if you look at history, they have long stood with Latin American people and Black folk like fighting for social justices. So that's something that it's not really put in media, yet not ignored, and their work is not being paid contribute. So we go to the next.
I will
slide.
build a great.
Again, looking at the numbers of Asian undocumented by country of origin, these are the biggest. I guess 4 I would say based on country of origin, and the communities are stigmatized when there's 1.7 million API out of 11 million documented people live in the US yet. That's not something that's really talked about. If you go to the next slide, those were the 4 major groups, and then there's another 406. There's another 400. Sorry, there's another roughly 500,000 Asian American groups from various different parts of Asia. Cambodia, Japan stand out, and they're not really being heard, and their voices are not being put out there. So those are things to keep in mind and remember, and like keep important, because these are people that are suffering. If you can look to the next slide, we can see a more breakdown. Go back one. Sorry. Yeah, we see the breakdown of state of undocumented people living in the state. Just the big three is California, Texas, and New York. So those are usually the cities or the places where there's the major support resources. Yet every other state and every other state has a population of undocumentation of Asian American undocumented people, yet their voices are not being heard. We go to the next slide. Why does this matter again? We see the lack of representation equals the lack of awareness. So just recently, over 100 Cambodians were deported by ICE. This was like 2-3 weeks ago. I was able to find it. As well as this, I found this other OPEC. I recommend y'all to perhaps check it out or look at it if you don't have the time. But Vietnamese refugees were deported. Again, this goes back to their issues are not being heard. They're not really put into the consciousness when we talk about immigration issues. So these are what the result is, or what happens. So Asian Americans, undocumented people are just deported since the Biden administration, during the Trump administration, and people didn't really know about it, and they were not able to fight because, again, the stigmatization, there were not many resources out there to fight for them. So this is why it's important to continue to uplifting their voices. Please go ahead to the next slide. And at the end, just key takeaways are things that I want y'all to take with you. Not all Asian Americans they're not monolithic, meaning they're not from like the same ethnic group. So there's so many countries that exist within the Asia continent. So that's always important to keep in mind. They're not the same. Model minority myth affect us all. So we saw just small examples of how this affects Latinx people, Black people, but also other minorities. Just to quote or to parallel with Carlos again, it's the same that it's happening with the dreamer narrative. In that case, we saw how like only like dreamers, quote unquote dreamers, were benefited, yet our parents, everybody else who was not a dreamer, it's affected. The same thing is for Asian Americans. It affects everybody. It still continues, and it continues for the systemic racism that is in the United States to prevail. And the last is, please educate, learn as much as you can, and take action when you see this happening. Next slide. And just, oh, sorry, go back one. Oh, and just additional resources for Asian communities. There's research studies done by the Asian, KRC is one of them, Los Angeles and Fullerton, Asian American Justice League, I believe. And there's also the Asian Hate databases. It has more guidelines to how you can prevent and take action. There's also research conducted. I just listed a few, but there's a couple going out there. these are just the biggest ones that I came up with, but I do encourage people to take action. You can go to the next slide. Again, to pay respect, to stop Asian hate. How can we help? Again, this was all new to me. I still learning everything. So how to help the victims, identify yourself. So reach out to them, introduce yourself, actively listen. So listen to and monitor the situation, pay respect, and essentially what they want. Ignore the attacker. This is kind of like what it's the best instance, especially with somebody who's not rationally thinking. So of course, ignore them and not pay attention to their focus on like helping the person being attacked, accompany if they need help, if they need to join living with them, and offer emotional support. And these are individuals who long have endured discrimination, yet that's not an excuse for not to listening or being a support for them. And how you can take action. So document as much. Phones are always helpful. Writing, those are landmark streets. Those are like best course of actions instead of violence. Delegate. So for that, feel free to afraid to step and seek up help for others. That's always protest, of course. That's always important to speak out on the issues. And the last, spread the word. There's always in social media, there's things going out there. So please share the resources and take action. And for the next slide, Sharon will be leading us for that, this portion. So thank you.
Thank you, Diego. So for the last 5 minutes of the presentation, we wanted to open up space for everyone based on the topics that we discussed, just kind of as a reflective decompression period as well, where we can share our thoughts and feelings following the presentation as well, because they were kind of deeper topics that had a lot of information. So hopefully we're able to really navigate them better together. So some questions that you can think about are, what is something new that you learned today about either topics, the dreamers narrative or the model minority myth, that you did not know before? If someone identified themselves as a dreamer to you now after listening to the presentation, how could you respectfully educate them on the dreamers narrative? And what do you think could be done to better support undocumented Asian communities? If you feel comfortable, you could totally unmute yourself, or you can just quickly respond in the chat to one of these prompts. But it would be really helpful to gauge where everyone is feeling right now and what we've absorbed after the presentation. While we wait for some responses, I can go ahead and share mine after working alongside these two and also listening to their presentation. I definitely did learn some new things as well about both the dreamers narrative and the model minority myth. And I think that the main thing from both topics that I've learned is how like they both just don't really exist. And it was kind of just both created at a very specific time for a very specific reason to make everything that's going on seem legitimate, to make immigration laws seem legitimate, to make like discrimination seem legitimate, just basically to support white supremacy in general. And I think that's really interesting to see those two paralleled. And someone from KRC mentioned, it's so interesting how the AAPI community is the fastest growing undocumented community when most folks typically associate the Latinx community with the undocumented narrative. That is a very good reflection. Thank you for sharing. If somebody identified themselves as a dreamer, I would kindly ask them to think about their families, those who could not go to school and are unable to fulfill all the requirements of DACA. those are both super powerful. If our either facilitators wanted to chime in on those comments, you can.
Yeah, I did wanted to just piggyback a little bit on one of the comments, just because that was one of the videos they mentioned, like the Asian Americans was one of the fastest growing groups in America. That was to some extent misleading, and it's a little bit outdated in the sense of the video. I think has a couple of years, but I believe that's still true. It holds true. And something that I was not able to share in this presentation was other graphics and research, kind of like showing that the quote unquote like I guess immigration influx or the immigration crisis happening right now. It's very alarmist. Yet when you look at the numbers, immigration numbers have been at its lowest. I think they're still at its lowest it has been since the last 50 years. The last time there was a peak was during the 1980s when the Reagan administration was. So that was a little misleading. Yet there's always like conversations on like, oh, there's a crisis at the border. They're just alarming, pretty much like targeted to like get people's emotions, like, oh, it's an alarm now. People from Central America, and then it's the next group. But then when you see the narrative, the scripts, the labels that they put, oftentimes they're done to create a political goal or to get like people reaction for something. So I did want to just like give my view on that. But thank you for that.
For Ria, just I know we're already at two. But yes, I also agree with you, Ria. There's a lot of people that are undocumented, and they're I know somebody my age that is a hardworking worker, and only the fact because he's not going to school, he doesn't qualify for the Dream Act. So thank you for sharing that, Ria, and thank you, Sharon, and thank you guys for listening to these topics, and I appreciate you guys. And this is gonna be our contact information. If you have any questions, we'll be free to to reply to you guys. And thank you guys.
Again, thank you so much for